In 1996, Dave Mowry had a total breakdown. He was driving down the freeway under a lot of stress and his mind was racing. And then his mind snapped. He could actually hear it like a twig snapping. He felt it like a small electric shock in his brain. He was broken. He consequently lost everything and he was homeless for 18 months. Dave was living in hell for 14 months. Dave's story is one that you will want to share with anyone who is struggling with or has had a family member struggling with mental illness. Do not miss his story.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Dave Mowry's story is one of inspiration, healing, and hope. He lives with bipolar disorder and severe anxiety for his entire adult life. Dave was a successful businessman until he lost it all due to mental illness. Welcome, Dave, to Never Ever Give Up Hope.
Thank you, Carol. Good to see you.
So tell us what your life was like before your breakdown.
A successful businessman. Before that, I was in management with a large wholesale regional bakery, and I had moved up the ladder quickly. And so I was doing that, and then I left there and started my own wholesale French bread bakery. And then I bought some Subway sandwich shops, ended up with 6 Subway sandwich shops. And I remember with my wife Heather, we were on vacation and we were sitting out on the deck and overlooking a lake and a little meadow. And I said, we made it. I was comfortable. We had income. We had assets, and so we didn't have to worry about these things. We were happy. The businesses were successful, and we made it. It was a great feeling. And then it wasn't probably 18 months afterwards that I had my breakdown, and we lost it all. When I met my wife, I told her that we were, I was on a 3-year cycle. I had no idea what that meant, but I know I had 3 good years and 3 bad years.
So let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
So during those good years when everything seemed to be going good, did that surprise you, knowing that your condition?
Well, didn't have any diagnosis, so I
Okay.
knew something was going on, but it wasn't, serious at that point. I had my highs and my lows, but they weren't too bad, and I had anxiety sometimes, but it wasn't too bad. So, the success didn't surprise me. I was ambitious. I had the resources and the inspiration and the personality, whatever, to be successful. So that's where I was headed, and I was confident I'd be there.
So what led up to that day then, that breakdown?
Yeah, I started another business. It was a wholesale bagel business and franchise company, and we had six bagel shops, and one of the bagel shops was running low on some supplies. And at that point, with the business, the I'd slid into depression. My mind was racing, the anxiety was overwhelming, and I was driving down the freeway with this overwhelming anxiety, sense of dread, and like you said, my mind just snapped. It was from the stress and the anxiety and the depression.
So, in hindsight, if that's possible, what would you have done differently that might be advice for someone?
I grew too fast, and part of that was the mania from my bipolar disorder. I had the successful businesses, and um, I just grew too fast. I didn't let the businesses settle in. I didn't have the basis the base that I needed. And so I think understanding where one is at a particular time, not being ambitious, but not overly so. I can't really describe the mania. The mania made me feel like I was the smartest person in the room. I was with mania, you're a risk taker, so you're taking risks, and I was expanding and growing and borrowing money to, grow the business. So, I think understanding one's limitations, it's really hard because, maybe you don't realize that or other people see it. And so, having a spouse or someone or a coworker or someone just to say, hey, you're getting a little bit out of control. That's what I needed. And somebody to say, slow down, stop, and you know, just just let things be as they are, as successful as they are, and let that settle in for, you know, the
Did
three
your
years that I had between my good years and my bad years.
did your wife notice anything? Like, was she giving you any warnings?
No, I was, being manic, I was happy, I was optimistic, I was positive, and so she didn't see the anxiety and overwhelming anxiety. I didn't feel it at home. I didn't express it at home. So it was going on, and she wasn't, she couldn't say anything because I wasn't communicating with her about it.
Take us to that moment in 1996 now.
Yeah, I was again driving down the freeway. My mind snapped, like you said, like a twig. I could feel it in my brain. My face went slack. My voice went monotone. My vision blurred, and it was everything I could do just to get home. And I got home and I went upstairs and I laid down in the bed. And that's where it started, my 14 lost years, my 14 um, dark days. I things were so bad. My wife, if I could get downstairs to make it the couch, I just sat. It was everything I could do, just to be, just to hang on. And so my wife said, "Hey, you need to go to the hospital." And so we went, and I had to stay in the psychiatric unit. Afterwards, I got out, and I wasn't well. I was still in that same place, and I'd I'd be having panic attacks. I'd be having something would trigger, a song would trigger a memory and a thought, and then that thought would lead back to the business, and then I'd relive the experience and have the panic attack. And that happened 5, 6 times a day. I mean, it was just awful. And then I'd come home and it was everything I could do just to hang on. We turned out the ringer on the phone. Um, if somebody knocked on the door, I'd have a panic attack. The anxiety would be overwhelming, and that's when I started hiding from the world, and if I did get out into the world, somehow I'd have panic attacks and overwhelming anxiety, and I'd just be trying to pretend that I was that I was okay. But I knew if people looked in my eyes, they'd see that I was pretending and I wasn't okay, and that I was in really bad shape. And then we lost, through this process, we lost everything, and we were homeless for 18 months. And I was in that dark place for 14 years. I was just
Let's
done.
good. Let's go back just a little bit. So okay, so you lost everything. How did that happen? Because you were not able to run the businesses? There wasn't anybody running them for you, or explain how that happened.
Yeah, I was running the businesses and managing the people. And then when I got sick, I couldn't. I just couldn't. And um, so essentially, the business fell apart. Um, and we ended up, broke and a couple $100,000 in debt. And so yeah, there was nobody else to pick up and take the reins and get through. But uh, that time lasted so long. The dark days and the lost years lasted so long that there was no way the business could survive.
Is this a normal scenario? In other words, when someone is bipolar and severe, as you were, is it is it normal that they are affected physically and that it affects them in every aspect of their life, or do you feel that you were on the like the high end of that scale?
Well, I was at the extreme. Well, I don't know. When somebody gets manic, and the older I got, the highs got higher and the lows got lower,
Oh, okay.
and in between, I was, okay, but the anxiety was still there, and it was overwhelming. And in a sense, that was the worst part. One with bipolar disorder, in a manic stage, takes risk. And they borrow money, they spend money, they have sexual and experiences and risks, and turn to alcohol and drugs and prostitutes, and so
Wow.
all these things happen. So my highs, I started businesses and borrowed money, and I was able to do it until my breakdown. People with bipolar disorder, they just depends on how high they get, but there's risk taking. That's one of the keys to bipolar disorder, is the risk taking, the overspending, the um, promiscuity, uh, all those things. And you think you're the
Wow.
smartest person in the world, and you
Right.
think you can do anything.
And so now you're homeless, you're hit bottom. What happened next?
Well, we were homeless with, the family, my wife and two kids, and we were homeless for 18 months until we were able to afford to get an apartment. It was an extremely humbling experience. The people from the church my wife went to and the kids went to, every year they collected money for a family that was in need. And some people from church came over, and I thought just to visit and whatnot. And then they handed us an envelope with the money that they collected. And it was, oh my goodness, that's us. We're the ones. Whereas we donated to other things, causes, people. Here we were, and it was extremely humbling. It was hard with the kids because, we lived in a basement, and the kids slept under an alcove. at the stairs, and Heather and I slept in another space. And the one of my big regrets and is for the kids, going through this, and for my wife going through this. There was a lot of guilt that I felt at that
Right,
time,
right.
along with the overwhelming anxiety.
So how did you pull yourself out of it?
Well, I think, and that's where, we can really talk to your audience and, what your show's about. Yeah, as bad as it got, and as I remember being downtown, and my wife was going to pick me up, and she was late, and I sat down on the sidewalk and leaned up with my back against the building, and I was just done. I knew if she didn't show up, I couldn't get up. I wouldn't get up. But she got there, and we got in the car. And at that point, or something inside, whatever it was, I just didn't give up. I kept trying. I kept thinking I can get better. I kept trying. I didn't quit. It was acceptance of my mental illness and my limitations with with without without giving up. I accepted it, and it was acceptance without resignation. So I didn't resign myself to this where I'm always going to be. I kept trying, and I kept doing things, and I kept trying over and over and over. And eventually, I think I found NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness. They have chapters all over the country, and my wife took me to a meeting, and it was a place where I didn't have to pretend that I could just be me. And then NAMI had a stand-up comedy class that they brought a fellow in to teach stand-up comedy to folks with a mental illness. And for some reason, I don't know, maybe I was a little manic. I decided I can do that. I can be funny. I can take that class. So I took the class, and frankly, it changed everything.
Wow.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another. Gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
Yeah, it was, I had all these triggers, these panic attacks, these PTSD, the anxiety and the guilt and all these things. And taking the stand-up comedy class, you look at your life and you look at possible material for jokes and whatnot. And the harder things are, the more challenges you have, the more material you have for jokes. And I had lots of material. And so what started happening with me from the class is I started looking for the humor in my dark days and my hard times. So when I was driving down the street and got triggered by a song and started going to that dark place and back and reliving it, I'd say, where can I find the humor in that? And it changed everything. It made my life, gave me something to look forward to. Finding humor in my dark days was very healing. And the jokes I came up with were laugh out loud funny, and other people, you know, enjoyed them, laughed at them, and I helped other people in the class write their jokes, and
Wow.
so and then we performed, and then I started teaching stand-up comedy to other folks with a mental illness, and I've seen the same transformation in their lives.
So could you give us a little bit, if that's possible, of your routine or a routine that's we can relate to?
Well, I've got do you want to hear, for some humor? I've got
Sure.
some jokes that I can share with you.
Okay.
And Yeah. So when, during my last years and whatnot, my depression, I was, I had thoughts of suicide and um, was at a place where, I was on the edge, but for some reason I didn't do it. But one of the when things were really bad, I went up into the bathroom and took a bunch of pills. And afterwards, I called my wife for help. She said there are more pills under the sink.
Oh,
Very helpful,
wow.
right?
How did you handle that one?
Oh, I mean, that was that's one of my favorite jokes. It's one of my wife's favorite jokes, and it's one of the favorite jokes the audience likes. Suicide is a big taboo. You don't talk about it.
Right.
But being able to find some humor in it for me was, a huge relief. Because that's how I could think about it. I could think about it as something that was material for humor instead of going back and having the regrets and reliving the dark days when I got triggered with it.
So when you do some of your routines, do people come up and talk to you about either relating or knowing someone that might be in that same position? Have you heard stories like that?
Oh, certainly, people always come up and say, um, first of all, I tell my story one joke at a time. So it's not about other people, or it's not about, there's no talking down about people. It's just my story. And yeah, people come up and they can relate. They can relate to this. They laughing at the suicide joke. Um, they say, that that's amazing that you talked about it. And yeah, I had this, I was suicidal and
Right.
have been, and so they really appreciate that. And other jokes that I tell, people relate to, and family members come up and say, I was here with my son who's mental health. I've never seen him laugh out loud as much because, yeah, people can relate. I have another joke if you'd like to hear it.
Sure.
I talked about the sexual ideation of mania, and then the depths of depression. But I finally, over time, um, I I I figured out how to know when I was manic or when I was depressed, because when I was depressed, I spent all day trying to get out of bed, and when I was manic, I spent all day trying to get my wife into bed. Yeah, so the stand-up comedy um, it changed my life. I may have healed eventually, over time, more slowly, but with the stand-up comedy and it doesn't have to be stand-up comedy. It can just be finding humor in your experiences,
Right. Right.
and it can just be when someone has that thought of the past or that regret or remembering this experience, just saying, where can I find the humor in that? That changes things and changes the pathway from going into that, back into that darkness to, another place, and creates new pathways to, just looking for the humor in your experiences.
And how old are your kids now?
My kids are 37 and 35.
So what do and how did they relate in their
Mm.
life now to what had happened in the past? Like has it made them stronger?
It's made them, knowing what they know now and seeing my recovery, they have found some strength in that and some inspiration in that. When we were homeless, they were 6 and 8, and I think it was 6 and 8. And those experiences they have. And I think in a sense that's made them stronger because they can see that, no matter how low you go, if you just, keep trying, even if it's just little things, keep trying. I know the keep trying part, I'd go down to the couch and I'd sit and I'd hang on. I'd just try to be, and I'd have deep breaths. And um, but when I started, well, when I was able or when I was aware, I'd go downstairs and I'd sit in a different spot. And just sitting in a different place changed things, and
Wow, that's interesting. Huh.
was something that I could do that was for me, it was, it was just a tiny thing, but for me, it was, I kept trying. Um, and I applied for jobs. I got some jobs and flamed out quickly. Uh, but 6 months later, I'd try again. And finally, I got a job at Macy's in downtown Portland. I was working 12 hours a week for minimum wage, and taking the bus downtown because we only had the one car and my wife worked. And I worked and I for a year, even though it was, just 12 hours a week. I was able to make it, and I went and I lasted for a year. And that was a huge, huge, huge milestone
Wow.
for me.
Yes, yes. And what about your nonprofit? Tell us about that.
Nonprofit is peer support, um, peer run, peer support. So folks with mental illness run it, and we have 700 people coming in the doors a month, and we have 22 support groups. And it's just a place where people can come in and they don't have to pretend. They can just be themselves. They can sit and say nothing and do nothing, or they can visit with other people. We have an art room where they can go in and draw or paint, or we have a game night where they can come and they can participate. We have an outside garden, a community garden, well, an outside garden where folks, just go and work and spend time, and it's healing. So that's the nonprofit, and it's just a safe place, a place where people can be themselves, and it's a special place. When they walk in the door, it's you know oftentimes someone walks in the door, it's the worst day of their life, and then they find
Wow.
help and support, and we help them find resources.
How fulfilling that must be in so many ways.
From going from the bottom and then being able to be in a place where I'm running a nonprofit and seeing and helping other people and using my experience to, just I've been there, so I truly understand and I listen, and you know, I can support people, and sometimes with humor. And yeah, it's a good feeling to be able to use my dark days and hard times and illness and loss and all those things, to spend time and be in a position where other people can benefit from it.
Are most people on medication, or is this something that you can do without medication to bring yourself around?
Yeah, it's most people are on medication. For me, it took me years and years and years to find the right combination of meds that work for me. And it's just two medications that I take. But what it does and what it does for other people with bipolar disorder is I still have the mania. I still go manic, but the highs aren't so high. They aren't high at all. I mean, they're a little bit high, but they're manageable. And then the lows are not so bad. And I know it's temporary, and that helps a lot. And other folks, not everybody's on medication, but a lot of people are, and maybe it's for their anxiety, and it relieves their anxiety and changes everything, where they can be social, where they can get out of the house, where they can do things. And for some people, others, they can do it without medication. I think one thing though is, there are people that, I think there's clinical depression and then there's situational depression. So situational would be something happens or you lose a job or somebody passes away or, and you're depressed and you go along and, over time, it gets better. But with the clinical depression, it's there. It's always there, for somebody that just lives with depression. And so there's a need for the medication to help them be at a place where, they can function and they can be in it, even if they just are able to come to NAMI and just find a chair and just sit and just be, that's a success. So yeah,
Right.
most folks, one of the hardest things for folks is to find counselors and providers, and we help with that. Um, and there's a kind of a movement to say, anti-meds or anti-psychologists or psychiatrists or the profession. And I've got my thoughts on the psychiatry, that the negatives about that. But when it comes to if somebody is truly in a bad spot and has a mental illness, medication can help and it's right for those people.
Now, tell us about your book. When did
Uh,
you decide to write it? Why? And then tell us about it.
okay. Well, if someone wants to know what it's truly like to live with a mental illness, OMG, that's me is, where you can relate, where you can see it, where a family member or someone can read it and truly understand. I was asked to blog for bphope.com, which is bipolar, BP Bipolar, the magazine, and extremely successful and widely read blog. And so I was asked to write for them. And so I started writing. When I wrote about my experiences. I went back to that dark day or an experience with anxiety, and I wrote about that. And or I wrote about my PTSD or panic attacks. Just so I wrote about it from completely openness and heartfelt, and um, people could relate. And my blog posts have ended up being read by over 1 million people, with the most common comment being, "OMG, that's me. You're telling my story. I don't feel so
Oh,
alone now." And so I wanted to, not everybody obviously reads the blog. So I took the best of the blog posts and compiled them and edited and put them in my book, OMG, That's Me. And self-published. And, if you self-publish, usually you sell 50 copies to family and friends. It's just how it is. But OMG, That's Me is sold over 17,000 copies.
that's
And
awesome.
I
Wow.
know I mean, who knew? It's amazing. But it resonates with people. Like I said, if it's just honest and heartfelt, and many of the blog posts before I started writing were, 3 steps to cure your mental illness, or um, 4 things you can do to not feel so depressed on a Saturday. It was kind of
Right.
that type of thing. But writing about and describing and just reliving that experiences and writing from that place, and sharing it as that really resonated with folks. It was different, and like I said, over 1 million people have read them and commented, and it's very very rewarding.
So what's next, Dave?
That's a great question. I had my 14 lost years, so I feel like I've got more to do. I mean, I it's not like I'm trying to make up for that, but I've got energy and focus, and So what's next is um, working on a new book about healing with humor. So sharing the experience of learning to find humor in your dark days and your hardest experiences, and then the how to. And so writing about that, I'm also thinking and kind of leaning and almost at the point of starting my own podcast about mental health and comedy. And, do comics have them, where are they at? Do comics come from a place of mental health challenges, of dark days, and you see comics that, go and they're great on stage and all that kind of stuff, but then they have, drug challenges and drinking problems and depression and, eventually suicide. Um, and yeah, I think Robin Williams is an example of somebody
Right.
who was, I mean, he was amazing, and his stream of consciousness work was amazing, but he had that dark side. And so exploring the, comics and do they have a dark side? Where does that come from? Is that the source of their humor? And I think that's the case with a lot of comics that you see. And I want to understand that. I want other people to understand. I think it's really an interesting place to go. And it's going to be serious in a sense, but it's also going to be funny because, you know, comics are funny, most of them, and they're going to share their experience, and they've got a sense of humor, and I've got a sense of humor, and so we're just going to roll with it.
Now, is there any message that you would like in closing to leave with the audience? Any word of encouragement or anything that you want to share?
I think a couple things. One is you can have acceptance without resignation. You don't have to accept the fact that where you are in your hard times, your dark days, the worst of times, that's not where you're going to stay. Over time, you can heal, you can get better, and things do get better. So, especially with suicide, yeah, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And if someone can keep that in mind, I was very suicidal and almost had a gun in my lap, and I didn't do it, thank goodness. But I'm living a great part of my life, and I'm so thankful that I didn't. The other thing is to, just no matter how hard it is, keep trying. And that may mean sitting in a different spot on the couch. It may mean getting up, 10 minutes earlier. One of the hardest things, and you'll find one of my chapters in the book is called Too Depressed to Shower. People with serious depression, it's too much to just to get in and shower and clean. For me, I slept in my clothes because it was too much to take them off and put them back on. And so, if you can, if you think you can, you know, get in and take a shower, change your clothes, just anything, put on a different shirt, just, little things. Every little step, I think, can make a difference. And so don't give up, keep trying. And, it's not Pollyannish that don't give up, things are going to get better, the rainbow is going to come. That's not what happens, but things do get better a little bit at a time. And look for the humor. When
Right.
when you have that PTSD attack, or even if you get out an event and you get anxiety and you have a panic attack in front of 50 people like I've had, uh, where looks, that was bad, that was awful. And it took me, weeks to recover, but okay, now where can I find the humor in that? Makes a difference because the next time you're in front of people, 50 people, and they're looking at you where you think they are, you don't have that panic attack because you've changed your mindset, and so you're looking for the humor in that experience.
Excellent advice. And I really love one line you said was, every little step can make a difference. So don't despise the small steps.
And yeah, exactly. And we can be really, really hard on ourselves. We can blame ourselves. We can do all those things. But just taking that tiny step. I used to have, my anxiety was so bad, if I went to the mailbox and saw any neighbors, I'd have a panic attack. And so I took to going to the mailbox at night when nobody was out. But then, just getting out, sitting on the porch was a big deal. And then eventually going down to the mailbox was okay. Little steps. Just sitting on the porch was the beginning of me being able to go to the mailbox and get the mail.
Well, I believe that you have touched a lot of people today, both from those who may be experiencing some of the things that you went through, and also those who know someone that your words could really benefit them. And I know that people will want to share what you shared today. And I thank you for being so raw, so open, and for sharing from your heart. It's obvious that you are passionate and that you care about people, even the other things that you are doing in your life right now. And my hat is off to you. I appreciate that you shared Never Ever Give Up Hope. You are the poster boy today for that, because no matter how bad things got, I mean, you still hung on, and that's huge. And so I thank you for being here today, and I appreciate everything that you shared, Dave.
Thank you, Carol. And I appreciate what you're doing, and you're reaching out, and you're helping people, and you're making a difference. So it's really a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.